We encourage you to hit the subscribe button right now so you can listen to more podcasts of Operation Truth. Ladies and gentlemen, we do want to hear from you, so we encourage you to email us directly at operationtruthofficial@gmail.com. I want you to know that your messages are likely to be heard, addressed, and listened to on air.
Operation Truth, the show they don't want you to see. Now, here's your host, Lou.
Hi, everyone. This is Lou Palumbo, and with me, as always, my co-host, Tom Fuentes. Every day is something new. For those of you that are following the news cycle today, we've had 3 American military members killed as a result of a drone strike in Jordan. I have to see what this response is going to be. We keep making reference to Iranian-backed operations, yet for some reason we don't go after Iran. But I want to start out by bringing to your attention, we've had something interesting occur this past week with Texas. Texas has chosen to defend its own borders, defend its own state. They installed razor wire. And subsequently, the United States government has sued, and the decision went to the Supreme Court. And it's really not quite clear the exact language of what was coming out of the Supreme Court. I've listened to the Lieutenant Governor of Texas saying that they said that they had to let them cut the wire, but they didn't have to remove the wire, the razor wire. And so he said they can cut all the wire they want. We're just going to keep replacing it. But what we have here is a little bit of a standoff. And I had a conversation with Tom Fuentes, who's a former assistant director of the FBI and quite knowledgeable when it comes to decisions and challenges of this type. And he really brought an interesting point of view and a perspective as to why we need to listen to the Supreme Court in this instance. And I want to take it to you right now, Tom.
Okay, Lou. Well, first of all, if the Supreme Court had ruled in favor of Texas and said, okay, do what you want, take down or put up whatever barriers you want, barbed wire, you name it, then they're basically saying the federal government does not control the border. Each state can decide. Well, that sounds great right now because we've got red states on the border that say we're not going to have this. We're not going to put up with what of Biden's negligence in enforcing border law. Problem with that is in a year, we're going to have probably a new president, a year from today almost. So when that happens, the new president might say, okay, federal government controls the border. I'm the president. I'm the chief executive. And we're going to put up barriers. Going to finish the wall. We're going to put up, barriers in the water, on the beach, you name it. And any of these states go blue or bluer. You've already got Gavin Newsom in California. But let's say Texas gets a new governor and a new legislature, and they're Democrats. And they decide, no, Trump, you're not going to control the border. Remember the Supreme Court last year said we could control our own border? Well, now we're going to control it, and you don't get to put up your barriers. You don't get to finish your wall, and that's the difference. So I think that the Supreme Court is basically saying that border control is the responsibility of the federal government, and therefore the chief executive of the federal government is the president of the United States. And if they want to open the border, terrible as that may be, you don't, as a state, get to come in and do what you want to do with the border. The federal government controls it. Now, we can say, and truthfully say, this is ridiculous. They're letting everybody in that wants to come in. They've been doing it for 3 years, and they're going to keep doing it. But so now we're going to have a standoff. We're going to have theoretically a constitutional crisis at the border. Who's in charge? Supreme Court basically is saying federal government. So that's terrible today, but a year from now, it won't be so terrible.
Yeah, that makes sense, Tom. That's a really interesting perspective, and they have to make sure that we don't create a scenario where it comes back to bite us. I'm still trying to figure out whose idea it was to allow 10 million plus people into this country unvetted, many of whom are on the terrorist watch list, many of whom are from every corner of the world. I'd like to know who the architect of that idea was. And I know we would all like to give Joe Biden credit. I'm not sure that he was the architect of this all by himself. I highly suspect that he had a little help from his friends, but I can see now, based on the most recent comments made by him and his willingness to close the border that Mayorkas says is secure. And, it's coupled with this election cycle we're in. So for 3 years, you let it just run wild to the extent that it's put our major cities in grave danger, both financially and even as far as a safety concern. And now all of a sudden we're talking about closing the border. I think, like we had said, these first two primaries identified something that's a real departure from the norm. Normally, Americans are okay until you put your hand in their pocket. What seems to be going on right now is the fact that they're concerned about their safety and the safety of their children. We last week had hearings discussing the impeachment process with Mayorkas, which he did not attend, that two mothers attended. One lost a child from fentanyl. The other one had a daughter raped and strangled by an MS-13 gang member who came across the border illegally. She's now suing the federal government. This is going to get more and more interesting. I guess the only guy you're allowed to sue in the United States is Donald Trump. We're about to find out if he's guilty of financial misrepresentation or whatever this hoax is about in New York. What's the consequences for failing to regulate this border, which ultimately translates to the death of your children? This is a really interesting country we've evolved into, guys. I want to just say this to you. We've got to put up razor wire and walls to protect this country. We've got to have armed people like myself and Tom, former law enforcement agents, so your children can go to school safely. What's going on in this country? No one likes to speak about this. We're losing the country because we stepped away from values that are critically important to this country: honor, integrity, trustworthiness. There's no longer common sense, logic, and reason attached to any of our discussions. It's a lot of emotions being driven. What I found interesting was that they played redundantly, and it's all over the internet. I don't know if it was a gaffe by Joe Biden or what this was, but he was in a rally amping up women on the pro-choice discussion, right? And that seems to be the Achilles heel for the Republicans. Eventually, they're going to back off this issue and give women the loudest voice in this discussion. But he started to mumble something that started with Trump's name. And after that, you couldn't understand what he was saying or referencing. Guys, this cannot be the president, whether he's a Republican or a Democrat. You see, part of the problem in the country today is we look at everything through a political lens, not through a lens of morality or decency or what's in the best interest of our children. We're all worried about our political viability. As Tom says, they're looking for control. I agree with him 100%. I think this stunt of letting in excess of 10 million people cross into this country illegally, many of whom are a danger to us, is just how they intend on controlling the voting to start with. Other people like Ann Coulter, I'm not speaking for Ann Coulter, I'm just going to repeat something I know that she said, not necessarily my feeling. It's about browning America. You look at the people coming across the border, I don't think 1% of them aren't black or brown. You have to explain to me why. If we're going to allow people, and let's allow all people in. I'm hearing it's rather difficult to get into the country right now. But independent of that, I think what we should do, guys, to start with, as long as we're taking statues down, now we're taking Jefferson out of New York, and we took Teddy Roosevelt from in front of the American Museum, the Museum of Natural History. Maybe we should take down the Statue of Liberty that sits in New York Harbor since the late 1800s. The one that says, "Give us your tired, your poor, your wretched masses yearning to breathe." Where did we get this ill-conceived notion that this country is prepared to accept anybody and everybody from all over this planet, house them under this roof called America, and think everything was going to be hunky-dory? Where did this bizarre concept come from? I don't think this was the intent of the founding fathers. I don't think they thought in those broader terms. By the way, if you Google this information for yourself, a little research, the population of the United States at the time of the inception of the country was approximately 2.5 million. We're at 360 million plus. I absolutely guarantee you. Where is this all going is the question. Tom, I know that you have some strong feelings about this. I'd like to hear your take on the condition of the borders, the condition of the country.
Well, first of
What's
all, Lou,
going on
getting
with
back
this?
to the people coming in at the time of the country being founded, where were they coming from and how are they getting here? They weren't flying in from Africa or Asia or the Middle East. They were getting on boats in Europe and coming across, and therefore they were 95, 98%, not just white, but the Judeo-Christian ethic behind them, that kind of philosophy. So when you have people that are basically as religious as the people already here that came in, generally England, let's say, then it wasn't that big of a cultural jump to leave Europe and come to the United States, and or even come to the colonies before we became the United States. So it wasn't that much of a thing compared to now, where we have people coming from all over the world, any way that they can get here. So that's part of the problem with the immigration aspect or the diversity aspect of our culture. But what's happened now is really, in a way, creeping Marxism. The people that are coming in and the people that they want coming in, they don't want them to assimilate. They want them to come in and take on the current, not just government, the culture. That's why they're tearing down statues, tearing down references to our history. No, our history is evil. We're not going to honor it anymore. We'll even take down statues and the names of Abraham Lincoln and George Washington off our schools. We can't have that anymore. We've got to have this Marxist philosophy. And so really the people coming across the border now, it doesn't matter what they are, but if they're anti-American and have no desire to assimilate, that doesn't matter either. And we all, many people were suspicious that, the Democrats they might be doing this on purpose to basically win favor with the new citizens, and they're going to become citizens, and therefore they'll be paying respect to the Democratic Party. Democrats will be in power forever. And proof of that's really their intention underneath. Look at the speech Senator Dick Durbin from Illinois gave on the floor of the Senate 2 weeks ago, basically saying, we've got these 28,000 Chinese migrants that have come across the border. And then we've got this massive shortage of new recruits in our military services, except for the Marines, just been shown on the news in the last couple of weeks, arriving in hotels in Colombia, South America, being well fed, well taken care of, well housed. Then they get on buses and make their way all the way to Texas. They get across the border and you see hundreds of them in a line on the side of the road with, green uniformed American personnel, Border Patrol, Customs, whoever, standing next to them. And then they're going to go through the process and they're going to get admitted, and then they're going to go to who knows where, and maybe get the permission, let's say, to apply for refugee status, but they'll get a court date about 8 years from now. But if they could join the military, boy, that solves a big problem for the Democrats. First of all, it shows the good idea we had an open border. And second of all, what a great way to replenish our military with personnel that don't want to join. Americans don't want to join those services right now. And the surveys that they've done show it's because those services are woke. They know if they get in, they're not going to get promoted unless they're LBGTQ plus. If they're not in one of those, if they're just simple white males, they're not getting promoted over the other people. And therefore, they don't want to join in the first place. They want to be dedicated, and they want that dedication basically to be rewarded. They want the military to be a meritocracy like it used to be. And now, if the main claim to merit you have is the color of your skin, or who you have sex with, or any of those issues, or whether you've changed your own sex, changed your gender, that becomes more important than just being really good at your job. And that manifests itself across all areas of the government.
Tom, to further this discussion about immigration, we're a country of immigrants. We all know that. We need a migration policy, one that includes our ability to vet people coming into the country, and to control the flow responsibly. I would say, in light of the times, we probably do need physical barriers. You know, part of your ability to succeed in life is your ability to stop doing what you've been doing and change direction on a dime. You know, my recommendation moving forward, and I don't really care who doesn't like what I'm about to say, take DNA and fingerprints. These aren't really complex issues. In reference to people coming into the country, you know, sometimes there's a compatibility issue here. You know, if you look to Europe, for example, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, Poland, to start out with, said to Islam, to the Muslims, your lifestyle is not compatible with ours. We don't subjugate and demean our women, and we don't throw gays off buildings, and we don't dismember people if they get caught stealing bread. You know, if you're going to come here, and everybody's welcome, you have to maybe let go of some of these customs of, or some of these notions or concepts under which you grew up. It just doesn't work. And the amount of people in this country today is so diverse that I don't expect we're going to make anyone happy, because every time you make a decision in life, it puts off someone else. These are not complicated concepts, guys. You know, I want to say something just in a very general sense about this thing with foreign policy. Foreign policy isn't as complicated as the government would like you to believe. The reason they want you to believe it's so complicated is so you won't think too hard about it and challenge it. That's really what's going on here. You know, before we go off on this discussion from the borders to the Ukraine, because something is really wearing on me, that we have to negotiate with this government to secure our borders, and in doing so, be prepared to give another $60 billion to the Ukraine, known as the money pit. And Tom has told you in prior podcasts that we're paying pensions, medical, salaries, nothing related to fighting Putin. We're suddenly propping up their economy. But my question is this the last 60 billion? I hardly think so, because it doesn't look like, in my opinion, that this country is going to prevail over Russia. You know, I think part of what's gone on in the scheme of international politics, a lot of people have weighed and measured this government, including its leadership. It's if you're not concerned about this, I want to say to people, I'm not telling you to vote for it, but if you're not concerned about the direction this country's gone in the past 3 years, I don't know what to say to you. If you're happy with the borders, you're happy with the indiscriminate manner in which a criminal element commits crimes in major cities, devalues property, runs businesses out, I guess you're happy. If you look at this whole discussion about your cost of living, they keep telling you how the economy is getting better, but except that the inflation rate is outgrowing the wage increase. I'm not the brightest guy on the planet, but I didn't fall off the back of an Apple truck. It'd be lovely if they stopped insulting us and stopped lying to us about every topic. That's really the worst part about this whole discussion. You know, I don't want to belabor too much on Donald Trump, because, you know, he has the potential to set this country back on course if he can just stop talking. At the conclusion of the primaries in New Hampshire, I talked to Tom and producer of the show, TJ Stone. I listened to him berate Nikki Haley, commenting negatively about her dress. Why? Making comments or referencing her as an imposter. Why? You give this girl an attaboy. She's making a run at it. In fact, she's the last man standing next to Trump. I don't know what else to say about this, guys. But, you know, sadly, we have more hatred for him than we do concern for our country. I talk to people every day, especially people that are Democrats. They have so much personal hatred and animosity to this man. We're prepared to sacrifice the safety of this country and the future of our children. That's the truth, guys. They lie to us about everything we embark on. Lying about the borders. And I have another question for everybody. Maybe, Tom, you can help me with this one. Whose bright idea was it to allow the criminal element to just run wild in our major cities? Just curious. I know that the DAs are behind this issue of not prosecuting anyone, but where did this idea come from? I mean, is this what we call a form of reparation, when this is going to be ultimately used to divide us further, to pit us against each other? Because I'm going to tell you right now, you may not hear it, but people harbor resentment when they watch children, for the most part, run into stores wildly and take everything that isn't nailed down. You know, Tom, you're living in the same America I'm in. We were both in police departments. You went on to a career in the FBI. What's driving this?
I think it's creeping Marxism. And the reason for the decay of the cities most recently is that George Soros and his PACs, his organizations, backed district attorneys running for office that would not prosecute cases. And it's brilliant as a Marxist philosophy to bring the cities down into decay where businesses can't stay, good citizens can't stay. They just can't live like that. And you have these prosecutors, and it doesn't matter what crimes you commit, they're looking to be able to get you back on the street almost immediately, almost before the police officer finishes writing their reports. And that's really the breakdown. If you look at the cities, the crime rates in these cities that are just off the chart, out of control, it really comes down to nobody will prosecute the case. If the case isn't going to be prosecuted, that means the hoodlums are back on the street. When that happens, police officers, good police officers, get completely demoralized in these cities, and they start looking for jobs somewhere else or pick a different profession because they no longer can risk going on the street, possibly getting killed on the street, and then not being able to benefit society because they're undermined right from the get-go by the district attorney's offices across the country who are being funded to be in those offices by Soros or Soros's PAC, the money coming from them. And that's really the breakdown. Once you started seeing these roving gangs of 50, 60 people go into a jewelry store, let's say, and start, breaking the glass, robbing everything that was there. And then you have Democratic politicians like AOC. They're doing that because they're hungry. Like they're going to take diamond rings home and eat them and, make soup with them or something. I mean, this is where we're at, that people don't want the law enforcement. They villainize the police and law enforcement, beyond the police themselves. And that's where the breakdown is. And that causes good police officers, if you only have a couple of years on the department and you can maybe begin a career somewhere else, either in law enforcement or not, it's time to go. And that's why New York City, for instance, I can remember when there were more than 40,000 police officers in New York. What's the number right now? 30? 30,000?
It's going to be under 30, Tom, because as we're well aware, as a result of the Mayor Eric Adams volunteering, he made two rather startling statements. One was that, and he said this, I heard him, I watched him, the immigration issue in New York City is going to destroy the city. And now we're looking at across the board 5% reduction in staff, police, fire, sanitation, and education. And he attributes that to supporting the migrants. I don't know if people are paying attention, but the roll call will go under 30,000. But more significantly, the cops that are there today aren't going near you. I don't know if anyone understands this, but the city of New York and their omnipotent wisdom wants you to do a complete write-up every time you have an encounter with the public. Well, there's a simple solution to this if you're a police officer. Don't have encounters with the public. Don't enforce the law. There isn't a week that goes by that I don't speak to someone where they tell me they've called the police and they've come half hour, 40, 45 minutes. Or in the instance of someone I happen to know personally who runs 2 private schools in the borough of Manhattan, called the police because a mentally disturbed person was kind of terrorizing the children get out of school about 3 o'clock. Cops never came. I don't know if you understand. You reap what you sow here. You talk about defunding the police. I got one better for you. You don't have to cut their budgets for hiring. Nobody wants this job. And the people that we are hiring, we're going in the wrong direction, guys. You need better candidate selection, better compensation, and better training. There are little equations that exist in the society today. This is one of them. My other one that I like, candidly, as far as the minority community, when they lack education, it equals unemployment, which equals crime. These are real simple concepts. We've made everything overly complex and unnecessarily complex, but we have made it convoluted to keep the public at bay. Tom, you use the term complacent in regards to the public, complacent, indifferent, despair, desperation, hopelessness, indifference. I don't know what the American public is thinking back, but everybody's sitting back on their haunches, waiting for the other guy to do something. And meanwhile, nothing's being done. Tom, about this statue issue that we're taking these statues down, this is being carried out by a handful of people in your major cities. This isn't 10,000 people converged on the Museum of Natural History. Folks, that's my home. It was a handful of people, and they bent. They took down Teddy Roosevelt. I'm just curious, has anybody looked at the symbol of the state of New York? Is it your intention now to change the symbol of the state of New York, which, by the way, has an indigenous person in it, I think with a pilgrim? What's this exercise about? And why do we lack such courage? What's really perhaps part of the problem is we have 100 U.S. senators and 435 House of Representative members that make up the Congress, 535 people that are steering this country of over 360 million. And you think they're going to do what's in your best interest? They can't keep track of whose best interest they're supposed to be acting in. This has gotten way out of hand, guys. They have to embrace this concept, less is more. Keep it simple, stupid. KISS. Tom, I want to talk a little more about this whole thing with the Ukraine, because it's quite troubling, primarily because we can't secure our border until we agree with our government to give $60 billion more to the Ukraine. Is that your understanding, Tom, or am I misled?
No, that's just, members of the House playing silly games with the Biden administration and all that. You asked how long, will this go on with Biden continuing to ask for these huge sums of money to send to Ukraine. It's going to go on as long as he's in office, because he's the one that personally owes the leadership of Ukraine for the millions of dollars they've put in his pocket and his family, the Biden crime family. This is simple. If you're a cop, if you're an agent, I don't care where, this is corruption 101. The bad guys give you money, and then you do what they want as payback. Simple as that. And in the past, in the FBI, when I was in Illinois, the Bureau was bragging at the time that I first came back to Washington in the Bureau that 4 out of the previous 5 Illinois governors had gone to prison being convicted in FBI-led corruption investigations. Now, one of the most recent, Governor Blagojevich, he was trying to sell or get campaign contributions because he was going to be able to select the replacement when Obama became president. He'd only been senator a year or two, but that meant that the remaining 4 years of his term had to be filled by somebody. So all of these ne'er-do-wells in the Democratic Party went to Blagojevich. I'll give you 20 grand. I'll give you 40 grand. I'll do, and it was, I'll put it in your campaign fund. And then later you can figure out a way how to make it your own money. So Blagojevich gets convicted of this, wiretaps of some of the candidates that went to him and tried to bribe him and all that. Blagojevich gets sentenced to 14 years in prison. And the amount of money that they were talking about, how much money he was going to get out of this, I don't think ever was more than $100,000. I don't think it was more than $50,000. The meager amount of money. And the courts ruled, no, corruption is a serious thing. We can't have our government undermined because the leaders have been corrupted by bribery or other favors. Now we have a president that the House committee actually has the documentation of the tens of millions of dollars that the Biden family has gotten from Ukraine, the job all separate, not counting the job for Hunter Biden being on the board of Burisma. My good friend Peter Schweitzer has an investigative group that have uncovered and gotten the evidence of $31 million being paid directly to the Bidens from Chinese government officials tied to their intelligence community. So by the time you add up the different money, then money from Romania, money from the wife of the former mayor of Moscow. And then you wonder how paid back. In her case, I think she wrote a check for $3.5 million to the Bidens. Later, when Russia invades Ukraine, the United States puts, embargoes on every oligarch in Moscow was basically tied down financially by the administration, except the woman. except the one that gave them money, that had dinner with them at Cafe Milano in Washington, D.C., and then later gave money directly to the Bidens. So the payback is she got to not be embargoed or have her finances tied up or her bank accounts confiscated or expensive yachts confiscated by the U.S. government. So you have basically classic 101. When all of this is said and done, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, in police academies across the country, federal, state, and local, and in colleges, criminal justice programs, these cases with the Bidens are going to be taught. They'll be the classic cases. Corruption 101. It'll have all of the elements that you'll need to know of what happens when a politician takes money and then has to pay it back, has to do favors, has to do whatever. And that's what you're seeing now. So that's why, since Biden has got in office, basically everything the Ukrainians ask for, everything Zelensky has asked for, Biden has done whatever he could to try to pay it. Hell with our border, hell with the situations in our country. He's got to do all of this stuff for Ukraine because, you know, as we used to say in the Bureau, they could rat him out. They could put the evidence out there that showed that he and Hunter directly, corruptly had received this amount of money from them.
You know, Tom, you brought up a good point about Biden being insulated with the likes of Kamala Harris, which is why they were a little leery about putting the arm on him just now for fear of who they're going to walk in. But I wonder if we're going to see him get criminally prosecuted when he leaves office in a similar manner that they've gone after Trump. You know, they've started a very dangerous precedent here. And right now, ladies and gentlemen, they're trying to make a determination as to whether or not the president of the United States has immunity, because they're going to become like cops. They're not going to make a move for you either, especially since they might be brought in, under indictment and criminally prosecuted in the future. So I'm wondering, Tom, is the stage being set for when he leaves office to go after him and criminally prosecute him?
Could be. Interestingly, you know, the Trump's lawsuit to try to get immunity basically ratified would actually benefit Biden, because at some point he's going to be, if he lives, he's going to be out of office. And every little decision that someone makes as an executive in the government, in this case, the senior executive of the executive branch, every decision could be subject to interpretation, analysis, or the people that think they were wronged by the decision coming back and suing. So, yeah, that could happen. So the idea that the president generally wants to be able to make decisions in good faith, hopefully, not for corrupt reasons, but in good faith, they make a decision. Well, somebody is liable to win or lose money based on that decision. You don't want everybody that's lost, everybody that thinks they've been a victim, coming back over the next 30 years and suing that person, suing that executive. So we don't want that either. This is a different issue, too, that Trump has talked about on the campaign trail of indemnification for police officers. So right now, many of the jurisdictions have said, if you're a street cop and you make a decision on the street and somebody decides, you write a ticket, it might have been justified, you make an arrest. It could be a perfectly lawful, proper thing to do, but the person on the other end of it may not like it and file a lawsuit against you. And the way it has been is that law enforcement agencies would have insurance policies for their employees to cover that, so that you wouldn't be personally sued or have a personal responsibility to take care of yourself. So right now that's changed. So if a police officer makes an arrest and the person doesn't like it, they can file a lawsuit. Well, okay, except the police officer is responsible to defend himself, pay for the lawyers out of his own pocket, stand to lose salary, employment, property, his house, his family, whatever, and you're on their own. So Trump has talked about that on the campaign trail, that police officers need to be indemnified when they act in good faith and do their job, that they are not personally going to be bankrupted by the lawsuits that will come later.
They call it qualified immunity, Tom. And to be honest with you, I think it's gone in New York, which is another reason why the guys on patrol, you have to understand that these police departments are broken up into units. Patrol is one. It has a chief in charge. He's called Chief Patrol. You have detectives, chief of detectives. You have special operations, which is usually aviation, emergency service units, bomb squads, so on and so forth. The patrol mechanism has basically thrown the brakes on in New York. The good news is the detectives are still clearing cases, but the detectives do not have the exposure that a uniformed cop does in a precinct. And that goes back to what Tom is saying in regards to qualified immunity. If you put your hands on someone and the force is justified, nothing prevents them from suing you. As we all know, anyone can sue anyone. And if you're having this notion about malicious prosecution, you can't make a rock bleed. More times than not, someone who's going to pursue a police officer in a civil suit, if you were going to go after him for malicious prosecution, it wouldn't bear fruit. We're just in this tailspin right now in the country. And I have to say, I don't know of another country in modern times or before that was in such disarray. And we have to ask ourselves, how did we get here? And no one seems to want to look at that question to answer it. I want to just say something, Tom, before we close the show. You can go on Prime Video, for example, among other outlets, and you can see these speeches and addresses John Kennedy gave, and also Ronald Reagan, by the way. But John Kennedy, there was a thing about this guy. I suggest everybody in politics today go listen to a man that spoke with some level of dignity and restraint, who spoke intelligently, who galvanized the country. He was so well loved in this country and abroad, you almost couldn't quantify it, which is partly why I think they assassinated him. We're not going to get into the assassination discussion today. Tom would have to lead the charge on that. He's the historian in the family. But you need to listen to this guy. And I don't think we've had anyone since, with the exception perhaps of Ronald Reagan. You can say comfortably about Ronald Reagan because when he first got elected, he won 44 states. His reelection, he won 49 states. So somehow he was pulling the country together. We have nothing but people pulling the country apart. And I hate to pick on Barack Obama, but this is an individual that told us we're going to redefine America. If this is the new America we're being redefined into, we've got a problem, ladies and gentlemen. And it's incumbent upon you to learn what's going on in your country, independent of your political lens. What people are whispering in your ear, or please stop listening to the media, by the way, guys, because they're so biased and so corrupt, you can't quantify it. We're going to close for today. We're going to be back soon on the next podcast. We're going to continue this conversation about the borders, about the Ukraine, because I think people need to understand we can't seal our borders and make our country safe because we can't agree to give the government permission to give $65 billion more to the Ukraine. And Tom's going to explain to you in this next episode where that money's going, just to refresh your memory. From Operation Truth, I encourage you to become part of this conversation. Contact us through operationtruthofficial@gmail.com. That's operationtruthofficial@gmail.com. We need more people to listen. You need to tell people also to listen. And we're doing this to give everybody a little bit of motivation, educate you as to what's going on. Tom and I aren't asking you to blindly follow us. We're giving you things to think about, food for thought. We're leaving that to MSNBC and Fox and CNN to try to tell you what you should be thinking. And I tell you this right now, Tom and I have done numerous interviews with many people that prop themselves up as journalists. Believe me, they couldn't find their backsides with both hands if it weren't for somebody like Tom, who comes in and fills in the blanks for them as they sit there. Many of them are privileged who never had dirt under their fingernails, ladies and gentlemen. That isn't Tom and I. We'll see you next time. Thank you for joining us today.